كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه أما بعد. Today we'll be discussing a new topic, and that is guardians in marriage, known as wali. A wali can be any of a person's consanguine relatives. We'll be discussing what a consanguine relative is, and we'll go into the detail of why Islam considers male relatives the guardians or those who can marry a woman off as opposed to female relatives. But we'll also learn that in the absence of all male relatives, female relatives like a person's mother or a sister can marry them off. And then we'll also be learning the fact that there are various there is a hierarchy when it comes to guardians in marriage. So you'll notice that the father and grandfather enjoy certain level of privileges which other guardians do not enjoy. For example, if any guardian besides the father or grandfather marries a minor off, then as soon as they hit the age of puberty, then that minor has the right to annul the marriage. But this automatic right does not occur or is not enjoyed by the minor when it comes to the father or grandfather marrying the minor off. They don't have this automatic right to annul the marriage. We'll also be learning that there are certain types of people who cannot, due to their circumstance, they cannot marry a Muslim woman off. They cannot be her guardian. For example, a slave or a minor, and we'll discuss why that is the case. We will also be moving on to the discussion of a person who has no guardian, who will marry her off. In that case, for example, we will discuss the ruling of a previously enslaved woman. We will learn that her former master will marry her off. He will be her guardian in her marriage. And in this day and age, we'll learn how that applies. For example, how it would apply to a new Muslim woman who would be her guardian. We will inshallah end with the discussion of a woman who has a guardian alive. Her closest guardian is alive but is disconnected. For example, he may be in a coma. Then what does she do in that case? Can the guardianship go to the next person who is closer in terms of guardianship, and can he marry her off? We'll also be discussing that in detail, inshallah. First, we'll be addressing what guardian means and who is a guardian. Generally, a guardian today is understood to be a keeper or protector who looks after the welfare of other people or their property. In legal language, guardian is typically used as an alternative to parent. Guardians are often adults who can make legal decisions for children who are not their own. And another definition of guardian is basically a person who has the legal responsibility to take care of someone who cannot take care of themselves. For example, a child whose parents have died. So this is what is understood as a guardian in today's day and age. When it comes to a guardian in Islam, firstly, there are a number of types of guardians, but we did say that we'll be discussing a guardian in marriage. So you may have a legal guardian who is basically, even in Islam, there are various types of guardian or guardians acting for different reasons. So, for example, a legal guardian is someone who acts in the best interest of a child when the child's parents are unable to do so. And this could be due to death, incarceration, or incapacitation. Legal guardians are usually relatives such as an aunt, uncle, or grandparent. You also have natural guardian, who is basically a guardian who has the right to supervise and regulate the activities of a minor. The father is the natural guardian of his children, and if the father is unable to act as a guardian, then his executor can act on his behalf. But like we said, we are going to be talking about a wali in marriage. So a guardian who gives consent in marriage. And that's basically what happens when a guardian who consents to a marriage on behalf of a bride. So the guardian is responsible for the bride's life before the marriage and must ensure that the groom is trustworthy and will continue to be responsible for the bride after the marriage. So this is what guardian in marriage is, where the person who gives consent to the bride and even in the case of a minor boy. So it's not just a minor, a bride, a female. It's also when it comes to males, when they are minors, they would need a guardian to give them consent to get married. So when what a guardian's responsibility and role is basically to protect the rights and interests of the person in this regard. Islam has designated a hierarchy when it comes to who can give consent to marry, and so the first and immediate guardian uh, is the one who should give consent to the person to get married, and those who are further or distant guardians cannot give consent if the closer guardian is present. So this is how it goes. The father, that's the most immediate guardian. Um, but before that, in the case where someone does already have a son, then it would be the son. And in the case that they have a grandson, then it would be their grandson. Let's say an elderly person, an elderly woman who wishes to get married, then her son or her grandson can be her guardian when it comes to giving consent and approval to get married. And then it's the father, it's the grandfather, great grandfather, etc. And then you have brothers, etc. So you have this hierarchy where the closer guardian can only give consent, and the further guardian cannot give consent for someone to get married in the presence of the closer guardian. And this is what Imam Quduri will be mentioning in detail, and that's what we're going to be learning today. So the first passage, Imam Quduri introduces this topic by saying, وَالْوَلِيُّ هُوَ الْعَصَبَةِ. The guardian, i.e. in marriage, is of the consanguine relatives. Now, this is where we discuss consanguine relatives. A consanguine relatives is relative. A consanguine relative is any person who is related to somebody as a blood relative. It cannot be through marriage and it cannot be through adoption. So a blood brother, a father, biological father, a son, biological son, a biological uncle. So these people are related through blood. And so consanguine relatives are not those who are related through marriage or adoption or suckling, etc. So um, those who are related only through adoption or marriage or suckling will essentially not be guardians in marriage. And this is where Imam Quduri also addresses the fact that it's the male relatives that are going to be the ones who are guardians in marriage, as opposed to the female relatives. So a female relative essentially will not be a guardian in marriage. We will learn later, however, that only in the absence of all the male relatives do the female relatives get permission to marry someone off. Now, the question is, why does Islam consider that only the male relatives, the guardians of someone in marriage, and not the female relatives? Um, Essentially, of course, ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the reason and the wisdom behind this law that the guardian in marriage are the male relatives. Scholars have attempted to explain the reasoning and wisdom behind this to be the case, that the male relatives are the ones who are guardians in marriage as opposed to the female relatives. They say that when it comes to marrying someone off, male relatives have two qualities and characteristics in common. One is a a certain level of compassion towards the child, the minor, and the other is a level of understanding and knowledge of what is best for that child or the minor. Now, these two combined are found in male relatives, and of course, anyone might say, a woman is rather more compassionate usually towards the child. So why can't she be the guardian in marriage? Why is it that males are the guardian in marriage, even though you'd find majority of the times maybe more women are compassionate than men towards children? That's why we said, and the answer to this is that both of these combined, these characteristics combined, that level of compassion as well as a level of awareness about what is best for the child, both of these qualities together are found in men more than women. And how can we say this? If you look at it this way, in those days, especially where women were not so outgoing, they weren't really exposed to the outside world. And so, although they would be very closely attached to their children and have more compassion towards their children and their minors, it's not always the case that they'd know what's best or they'd know what is the most beneficial for the child. And so when the and as opposed to the father, the grandfather and other male relatives, when they do, because they would be the ones who bring they would be the ones who are responsible of taking care of things, the family. They would be responsible of the financial side, and various other responsibilities that they would be relating to the outside world. And they would, you know, typically be mingling and mixing with various people and socializing. And by virtue of this socializing, they would have more knowledge about who would be a good potential suitable match for their minors, and various other reasons why a man would actually be more aware of what is best for their children. And that's why when it comes to marriage, the father, the grandfather have certain level of privileges where the mother, the grandmother won't have the same. Rather, all the male relatives come first when it comes to marrying someone off, and then the female relatives in the absence of all male relatives. So the reason, as we said earlier, that it's because of the high level of knowledge of what's best for the child. Now, it's not a lack of qualifications or lack of credentials found in women. No, that's not the case. We said that it's because of the circumstance that the father, the grandfather, and other male relatives would be more exposed to the outside world, would be socializing more. And then by virtue of this, like we said, there would be so much knowledge and so much awareness of what is good, and they would know in which cases there would be potential harm, so that they could avoid this. And Islam hasn't placed this responsibility on women to go and take care financially, and they wouldn't be really responsible of this kind of stuff. And because of this, they would be not so exposed on the other side about best for their children, especially when it comes to the case of getting them married off. So coming back to this point, Imam Quduri says that wali, the guardian in marriage, is one of the consanguine relatives. So one thing we learned about consanguine relatives is that they are those relatives who are related through blood, not marriage, not adoption, not through suckling. They are also the male relatives, so it's not female relatives. And these are the ones whose responsibility and role is to take care of and protect the interests of the person they are getting married off. So now we've learned who a guardian can be in marriage, and that it's not just one person that can be a guardian in marriage. Rather, there's a hierarchy in there, that there is an immediate guardian, and if that guardian isn't there, then there is another person who's a guardian. And we also learned why primarily it's the male relative that becomes the guardian in marriage. We're going to learn soon, inshallah, that in the absence of all male relatives, then a female relative can, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, marry the minor off. That is in the absence of all male relatives. So that is the view of Imam Abu Hanifa. We will learn soon, inshallah. In the next passage, Imam Quduri rahmatullahi alayh addresses another point, more detail in relation to guardianship of marriage. He says, if the father or grandfather marries them off, marries the minors off, minor boy or minor girl, then there is no option for them after attaining puberty. But if someone other than the father or the grandfather marries them off, then each one of the two has an option. They both have an option. Yes, the minor girl and the minor boy, no difference between them. They both have an option. If they want, they may remain in the marriage, or if they want, they may annul the marriage. So there is either the father or grandfather marries the minor off, or any other guardian besides the father or grandfather marrying this minor off. Remember, anyone besides the guardian cannot marry a minor off. So a minor can be married off provided this is done by the guardian. But there is more detail. We see that the father or grandfather have certain level of privileges over other guardians. So if the father or grandfather marries the minor off, then once the minor has become an adolescent, past puberty, no longer do they have the right to annul the marriage. They don't have the automatic right to say, I'm no longer in the marriage. But if it's anyone besides the father or grandfather, let's say the brother, a minor boy, let's say Zaid, his elder brother Bilal married him off while he was a minor. Later on, Zaid reaches puberty. So because his brother Bilal married him off, not his father, not his grandfather, his brother married him off. Now that he's reached the age of puberty, he has two options. Either he can remain in the marriage or he can annul the marriage. So automatically he can, if he wants to, as soon as he reaches puberty, then he can annul the marriage if he wishes. So this is the right of the minor as soon as they reach the age of puberty. So previously we've explained why the minor can get married off. So this is the consent of a minor is not needed to get them married off. So we've explained that before. But what needs to be addressed here is, why is it that the father and grandfather have a certain level of privileges over other guardians? So the main reason the scholars mention is that there are two things that are found commonly in the father and grandfather, okay? And they are found at a very high level, at the highest level compared to any other guardian, okay? These two things are compassion and a full level of awareness of what is best for this minor, okay? Compassion, the highest level of compassion is found in the father and grandfather, and a full level of awareness is found in the grandfather and the father, of course, regarding what is best for the minor. Now, again, you can say that the mother has this, the grandmother has this, okay? So remember that we said both of these are found at the fullest level, at the highest level. So let's say the mother is very compassionate, has so much affection towards the minor, but she may not, okay? She may not have the full level of awareness of what is best due to her circumstance, because the father being out and about, as we said, would be aware that, they deal with these things out and about. And the mother being inside may not have the knowledge, not that she's not capable, she may not have that full awareness. So that's what we mentioned earlier. And other guardians, say, let's say the brother, let's say the son, let's say this woman, let's say this, in this case, it won't be the son because this is a minor, but let's say this minor had a brother or a cousin, yes, a cousin brother. Now, the brother or the cousin brother, as an example of guardians, besides the father and grandfather, they may not have, okay, they may not have both of these qualities. And if they do have both of these qualities, compassion and awareness of what is best for the child, for the minor, then it won't be at the highest level. It won't be at the highest level. So, and that's why if because there could be a slight lower level of compassion or lower level of awareness. That's why the Sharia gives this right to the minor that as soon as they reach the age of puberty, they have an automatic choice to annul the marriage. But when it comes to the father marrying of this minor or the grandfather marrying of this minor, due to the high level of compassion and due to the, not just high, the highest level of compassion that can be found, and due to the highest level of awareness of what's best for this child, when they grow older, they reach the age of adolescence, they become mature and baligh, then no longer can they choose to annul the marriage. This is even if, so in the case where the brother, the brother or anyone beside the father and grandfather has married them off, the child who grows up and matures has the automatic right to annul the marriage. Okay, so this is the difference between the level of privileges a father and grandfather has as opposed to other guardians. Now, is this an absolute thing that when a father or grandfather marries the minor off, then the child has no choice? This child who has reached puberty has no choice to annul the marriage? Is this an absolute thing, or is there any consideration in certain circumstances? The answer is yes. There is some consideration, and the scholars say it is when the father or grandfather, they are known to make poor choices, whether it is poor choices in relation to their own family, poor choices in relation to their businesses, poor choices in relation to the day-to-day matters. If they are known to make poor choices and they don't really make the right choices, then in that case, this ruling does not apply. Rather, they will fall under the ruling of other guardians, where the child automatically will have the right to annul the marriage once they reach the age of puberty. Okay, let's say, for example, the father. Maybe they naturally, or they are known to make poor choices, or let's say the father has two families, yes, and he usually gives more preference to the second family, and the children of his first wife, he tries to deprive them of their rights. Just an example. Then if the people know this about him, and he marries the child of his first wife off whilst the child is a minor, then in this case, because he is known to make poor choices for that family, then the child will have the right to automatically annul the marriage once they reach the age of puberty. Let's say the grandfather. Grandfather may not be with it. The grandfather may be so old that they don't really realize that the choices they're making are not really sensible. They're making silly choices. Okay, as an example, then in that case, when the child grows up, then they have the automatic choice to annul the marriage. So no, it is not an absolute case that the father and grandfather, in every single situation, in every single circumstance, that if they get the child married off, then when the child grows up, they have no choice. No, it's not an absolute case. So there is some consideration in this, and this and the scholars have mentioned that it is when the father or grandfather are known to make poor choices, as we said. In the next one, Imam Quduri addresses another ruling. He says, there is no right of guardianship for a slave, minor, the insane, nor for the non-Muslim over a Muslim woman. We've established that the guardian can only be a male relative, but it's not just any male relative. Whichever circumstance they're in, they can be a guardian in marriage. No, there are certain conditions that must be found. If those conditions are not found within those male relatives, then they cannot be guardians. So the first one, he says, a slave. We already learned that a slave has certain restrictions and cannot do certain things that a free person can do. So it is a condition that a person be free to be a guardian in marriage. Minor. A minor is a person who hasn't reached puberty. So they cannot be a guardian for a person in their marriage. Insane. An insane person. Yes, even if they're not minor, but they are insane. And due to this insanity, they cannot be a guardian in a person's marriage. And lastly, a non-Muslim. A non-Muslim cannot be a guardian for a person in their marriage, even if, like we said, for all of these, even if they are a person's next immediate guardian. Let's take the example of Khadija. Khadija wishes to get married and she wants the guardian's consent. So, and she has no son. And we said that the son comes as the immediate guardian. But what about if the son isn't present? We go to the next guardian being the father. Khadija goes to her father, Abdullah. Abdullah is a Muslim, but there is one issue. He is insane. And so because he doesn't fulfill the condition of being a guardian, you have to be sane person. She cannot seek his consent. Okay, let's go to now the next guardian in this hierarchy is her brother. Her brother is alive, but he isn't a Muslim. Okay, so what do we do in that case? Can he be her guardian? No, he cannot be her guardian, and so on and so forth. So, if even though these are all her close relatives, but if they don't fulfill the condition, essentially they cannot be her guardian in marriage. They cannot marry her off. Okay, so this is what Imam Quduri is saying here. And then he mentions that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala said that it is permitted for people other than male relatives to give away in marriage, such as a sister, a mother, and maternal aunt. Okay, so a sister, a mother, maternal aunt, and other female relatives can give someone away in marriage. Okay, so the question is, we've just mentioned above that it's necessary that the guardians in marriage be males. So what does this mean about Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah saying that a female relative can also give someone in marriage? What does this mean when we've just mentioned that male guardians can only give someone away in marriage? So what's being mentioned here is that this is in the absence of the asaba, the consanguine relatives. So only if these male relatives are all absent, so no son, no father, she has no brother, no cousin brother, etc., etc., no one, her grandfather, her grandchildren, grandson, nobody, yes, only in that case can she go to a female relative, and that female relative, such as her sister, her mother, her maternal aunt, only they can give, only then can they give her consent to get married. Only meaning only then can they marry her off. Okay, so this is what Imam Qudui is saying here, that the condition is that the male relatives must be absent for the female relatives to give her away in marriage. In the next one, Imam Quduri addresses something else. He says, whichever previously enslaved woman, okay? And the reason why I mentioned this is because you'll notice that it's talking about slavery here. So whichever woman, previously enslaved woman, has no guardian, if the master who set her free, her mawla, if the master who set her free gives her away in marriage, then that is allowed. So again, this is talking about a previously enslaved woman. So she was once upon a time a slave woman. Then her master sets her free. Now she wishes to get married. Who is her guardian? Now she hasn't got any male relatives alive, or they're not in contact. She doesn't know who to go to. Then she has one person, and this is her master who set her free. He can marry her off. He is her wali in that case. Okay. So now this is the discussion where regarding the absence of a person who can be a guardian in marriage. Okay. So in those days where there was a Muslim state, Muslim governance, Muslim ruler, judge, qadi, etc. So in those days when there was no, if there was nobody to marry a woman off, then meaning among her relatives, then the woman could have gone to the qadi. The woman could have gone to the judge so that he can marry her off. Okay, so this was in those days, but how about in these days? Okay, the question is, we don't have any judge, a Muslim judge in this country in this day and age. There is no Muslim governance, a Muslim state. So what happens in the case where there is no Muslim state and no Muslim judge? Who does a woman resort to get married? Who can be her guardian when she gets married? The scholars say that in that case, it would be somebody a Muslim who has some sort of authority in that region, in that area. So let's take the example of a a revert woman. A revert woman wishes to get married and she is looking for a guardian. So she has no Muslim relatives. All her relatives are non-Muslims. So in that case, what she would do is perhaps go to the local imam, because an imam is one of those who has some form of authority in knowledge, authority over the public in terms of being able to give some guidance in relation to Islamic, teachings. So the Imam has some sort of authority. Let's give another example. Um, in places where, especially in villages, there's usually some sort of authority, some family member of a tribe who is very senior. The people usually go to that person when it comes to dealing with certain problems, certain conflicts. So in that case, that senior member of that tribe will be the guardian for a person who has no guardian. So that senior member can get that woman married off. So this is the case when a woman has no guardian to get her married off. So in this passage that we've just read now, this is a ruling on a woman who doesn't have any guardians. Who does she resort to after that? So the guardians aren't alive, or they are alive but they don't fulfill the conditions to be her guardian in marriage. Okay. Now the next one is closely related to this. Imam Quduri addresses the case where the guardian is alive, but not only alive, fulfills all the conditions, but they are physically absent. They cannot be reached. They are inaccessible. So he says, when the most closely related guardian is absent in a disconnected absence, غيبة منقطعة, and he addresses what exactly that means later in the next passage. So he says, when the most closely related guardian is absent in a disconnected absence, it is permitted for whoever is more remote than him in relation to give her away in marriage. Okay, so the guardian is alive. Again, he fulfills the condition, but he is physically absent such that they cannot reach him. Okay, now the disconnected absence will be explained later, but the main point to understand here is that what does she do? Does she wait for that person who is absent? No. If the person is absent, if the closer guardian is absent, then the the authority to marry her off goes to the next guardian, the guardian who is next, immediately next after the first guardian. So this guardian can get her married off. But this is what Imam Quduri is saying, that is permissible. She doesn't have to wait and wait and wait until this immediate guardian comes back or becomes accessible. No, when it has been established that this guardian is absent, then she can go to the next guardian who comes in the hierarchy to marry her off. And now to summarize what we learned in today's lesson. We started off the lesson by introducing who a guardian in marriage is, or a wali. We said that a wali is a person who is any of one's consanguine relatives. We went into the detail of why Islam considers the male relatives the ones who can be guardians, or the ones who marry someone off, as opposed to the female relatives. So we went into that detail. And then we discussed the difference between the father and grandfather as guardians and other guardians. We said that, let's say any guardian besides the father or grandfather marries a minor off. In that case, as soon as the minor hits puberty, they have the right to they have an automatic right to annul the marriage. When it comes to the father or grandfather marrying this minor off, then this minor, as soon as they hit puberty, they don't have this right to annul the marriage. And then we said that there are certain types of people, due to their circumstance, they are not allowed, they cannot be a guardian for anyone in marriage, for a Muslim woman in her marriage. We said that they are a slave, a minor, an insane person, and a disbeliever. These cannot be a guardian over a Muslim woman's marriage. And then we discussed the ruling of in the absence of all male relatives, we said that a female relative can marry a Muslim woman off, can marry someone off. And then we moved on to the discussion of a person who has no guardian, a Muslim woman who has no guardian. Then what does she do in that case? There are certain types of people who can marry her off. For example, in the case where she was a previously enslaved woman, we said that her previous master will be able to marry her off. He will be her guardian. And in today's day and age, where, for example, a new Muslim woman, all her male relatives are probably non-Muslim. In that case, we said that she can turn to somebody in that locality who has some form of authority in that region. A Muslim person, of course. And then we discussed the we concluded with the ruling on a person who is disconnected, or is absent, is alive, but is absent in a disconnected absence. We said that in that case, the next immediate guardian can marry that person off. And inshallah, in the next lesson, we'll be discussing what we mean by disconnected absence.